I'm going to attempt to explain the Friday the 13th horror movie saga using as many Taylor Swift song titles as I can. Why would I do such a thing? Well, you see, I'm RoboDanger, and my channel is about horror, particularly horror movies. And October is the spooky month, which means more people than usual are looking for scary stuff, which is great for channels like mine. On top of this, there's a Friday the 13th in October, which hasn't happened in 6 years. That's a spooky day in a spooky month. But then, Taylor Swift did the unthinkable. She decided to release her epic, record-breaking concert movie, not just in October, but on a Friday the 13th in October. And now, in the month where everyone is supposed to be searching for horror videos, on the day that everyone is supposed to be searching for Jason Voorhees, now all anybody is talking about is Taylor Swift. Now don't get me wrong, Swifties, I too am a Taylor Swift fan. Hell, I saw her live way back in 2009. And I get that her favorite number is 13, so is mine. But since Taylor Swift thought it was okay to take over the horror month, and she thought it was okay to take over the Jason Voorhees day, then I think it's only fair that Jason and the Friday the 13th movies take over the Taylor Swift song catalog. So for all the slasher fans and or Swifties out there, I'm going to retell the story of all the Friday the 13th films while cramming in as many Taylor Swift song titles as I possibly can. I'm talking singles, album tracks, even features and unreleased tracks. I'm even going to throw in a few album titles and reference a few lyrics where they make sense. Because there are 12 Friday the 13th films and over 200 songs I need to cover, I'm breaking this one into 2 parts. In this first part, I'm covering the first 8 Friday the 13th films, the ones that were released in the 1980s by Paramount, starting with... The story starts when it was hot and it was summer in 1958, when 2 counselors at Camp Crystal Lake sneak out to a cabin to make love, but have their love story come to an end when they are slaughtered by an unknown killer. 21 years later, a man named Steve Christie decides to reopen Camp Crystal Lake. He hires a group of counselors and it's time for summer camp season to begin again. A young woman named Annie is hired to be the camp cook, and on her way to the camp, everyone she talks to tells her she should have said no to the job offer, because everyone thinks the camp has a death curse. It all started 22 years earlier, when a young boy drowned in the lake, followed by the murders and some other bad luck. Annie laughs off the warnings, but when she hitches another ride from an unseen driver, she soon realizes she's in danger. She tries to escape, but sadly, never makes it out of the woods. The killer makes it back to the camp, where one by one the counselors realize poison ivy isn't the most dangerous thing at summer camp, as they are systematically killed off, including camp owner Steve Christie, who is stabbed in the midnight rain. Bill goes outside to investigate a power outage, but when he doesn't return, Alice goes out looking for Bill and finds his body pinned to a door with arrows, proving that the killer is quite the archer. A panicked Alice thinks she's been saved when an older lady named Mrs. Voorhees shows up, but things go south when the lady tells Alice that her sweet, innocent boy Jason was the kid who drowned in 1957, and there was no way she could let the camp open back up again. Driven insane with grief, this mad woman blames the camp and the neglectful counselors for the death of Jason. Mrs. Voorhees pulls out a knife and pretty much says, "It's me. Hi, I'm the killer, it's me." After a long chase and battle with Mrs. Voorhees, Alice manages to get her hands on a machete and chops the old lady's head clean off. And there goes the maddest woman this town has ever seen. Alice falls asleep in a canoe, and the next morning wakes up as if today was a fairy tale, until she seemingly gets pulled underwater by the corpse of 10-year-old Jason, but nobody believes her story. 2 months later, Alice is still not in Wonderland, as she deals with her trauma from the previous film. At her apartment, she goes to open the fridge, but on the other side of the door is the severed head of Mrs. Voorhees. It turns out her son Jason never actually died, and despite Alice's insistence that Jason was still a little boy who could never grow up, it turns out Jason did grow up into a full-grown adult who has decided there's no punishment better than revenge for the woman that beheaded his mom. 5 years later, a guy named Paul and his girlfriend Ginny open a camp counselor training facility at Crystal Lake, not realizing Jason has been living in exile in a nearby shack. When Jason realizes they've set up shop in his neck of the woods, he doesn't tolerate it. While most of the camp leaves for a night on the town, the remaining trainees are hunted down by Jason, including Jeff and Sandra, who are impaled together when Jason decides that 2 is better than 1 when it comes to kills. Paul and Ginny return from the bar early and Jason attacks them. When Jason seemingly kills Paul, Ginny realizes, "You're on your own, kid." She thinks, "I know places I can hide," but Jason's like, "I can see you," forcing Ginny to wound Jason with a chainsaw and flee through the woods. She stumbles upon Jason's shack, where he's created an altar with his mother's severed head on it like she's a false god. Ginny sees Mrs. Voorhees' sweater on the altar and decides to dress up like Jason's mom to convince Jason that she's his mother. But when Jason catches a glimpse of his mother's head behind Ginny, I think he knows she's lying. A not dead Paul arrives in time to save Ginny, but when Jason overpowers Paul, Ginny saves her lover by burying a machete into Jason's shoulder. Ginny and Paul return to the camp, thinking they're safe and sound, but Jason crashes through the window and grabs Ginny in what may or may not be a dream sequence. Just 2 days later, a group of 7 friends travel to Crystal Lake because one of the friends, Chris, has a house there. The last time Chris was in Crystal Lake, she was attacked by a deformed man, and now she's come back to deal with her trauma. It turns out, coming back around here will be bad for her health, as her attacker was Jason Voorhees, and he coincidentally happens to be hiding out in her barn. On the very first night, practical joker Shelley puts on a hockey goalie mask and tries to scare Vera, who is played by former beauty queen and Miss America contestant Catherine Parks. Jason slices the throat of the Joker and the Queen gets a harpoon to the eye. Jason sees Shelley's hockey mask and thinks, "You belong with me," wearing it as he knocks off Chris's pals one by one. Chris and her boyfriend Rick return to the house to find everyone missing. Rick goes outside to investigate, and Jason squeezes Rick's head so hard, his beautiful eyes pop right out of his skull. Jason reintroduces himself to Chris, who thinks he's psycho because he likes to stab her friends with things. She fends off Jason with a bookshelf and several knife attacks as Jason tries to figure out how you get the girl to stop fighting back already. She tries to escape in a van, but Jason's like, "I hope you don't think you're losing me that easily." Chris manages to put a noose around Jason's neck and hang him from a barn loft, but when she opens the barn door, he's like, "Hi, I'm right where you left me." Jason reveals his face to her and she thinks, "I knew he was a killer first time that I saw him." Chris finally finishes Jason off with an axe to his face, making her the lucky one who survives in the film. Jason is pronounced dead and brought to the hospital morgue, but he refuses to stay dead, killing a coroner and a nurse before returning to the lakes. A new group of teenagers heads to Crystal Lake for their summer vacation, including Ted, who just got dumped by his girlfriend Betty. They meet neighbors Trish Jarvis and her little brother Tommy, a typical American boy who's into video games and Halloween masks. Trish and Tommy also meet a handsome camper named Rob, who we later learn has come to Crystal Lake to do some vigilante shit, hoping to get revenge on Jason for killing his sister Sandra in part 2. The teenagers throw a party, but Jason makes sure they all have a cruel summer vacation, killing one slow, out the window, and when they bleed, he'll be the first to know. Jason kills Rob and chases Trish back to her house, where Trish smashes Tommy's computer monitor over Jason's head, and Tommy learns this is why we can't have nice things. Jason survives and chases Trish, who's forced to jump, then fall out of a window to escape. Tommy has an epiphany and decides to cut off his hair and dress like young Jason to confuse adult Jason. The ruse works. Tommy attacks Jason, and we are treated to Jason's death by 1,000 cuts of a machete. So Jason is finally dead and buried. Is it over now? Absolutely not. Because several years later, Tommy is still haunted by Jason Voorhees. After several stays in mental hospitals, Tommy is moved to the Pinehurst halfway house for troubled teens who are all too well to remain institutionalized, but not ready to re-enter normal society. It's all fun and games till somebody loses their mind, and that somebody is Pinehurst patient Vic, who apparently is crazier than they thought, as he snaps in an incident involving a chocolate bar and butchers another patient named Joey with an axe. Vic is arrested, but soon, people in the area start dropping dead, and the sheriff isn't ready for it. "I'm sorry, the old Jason can't come back to kill right now." Why? Oh, 'cause he's dead. Tommy begins seeing visions of Jason and wonders, is this in my head? I don't know what to think. More people get killed by the mystery killer, including Pinehurst residents Eddie and his girlfriend Tina, who doesn't stay beautiful for long once the killer gouges her eyes out. There's a recurring mystery throughout the story of us trying to figure out who the killer is. Did Vic escape? Did Tommy snap? Or is it really Jason after all? When a local idiot makes fun of Tommy for being a wacko, Tommy's anger issues get the best of him and he beats the guy up. Pam tells Tommy, "You need to calm down," but Tommy runs away. Pam and the cook's grandson Reggie return to Pinehurst to try and find Tommy, but instead, Reggie finds the dead bodies of most of the residents. And if I'm Reggie, that's the moment I knew I was in trouble. The door suddenly bursts open, and they scream when they see the hockey-masked killer come in with the rain. Everyone wonders, how is it possible that Jason can come back? Be here when Tommy killed him in the last movie. Pam and Reggie escape to the barn, where Reggie does a hit and run on the killer with a bulldozer, but somehow the killer manages to shake it off and pursue them into the barn, where Tommy finally shows up. When the man in the hockey mask slashes Tommy's chest, he realizes this is really happening. After a long struggle in the loft of the barn, Tommy tells the killer, "It's time to go. Over the edge to your death." It turns out the man behind the mask was not Jason, but instead Roy Burns, one of the paramedics at the scene of Joey's murder, who coincidentally was also Joey's estranged father. When Roy saw his dead son, he lost his mind and decided to copycat Jason's style and go on a murder spree of his own. Later at the hospital, Tommy seemingly loses his mind, and it looks like he's about to kill Pam, but apparently she says, "Don't you do that." Because at the beginning of the next movie, Tommy seems relatively sane and not murdery. He's returned to Crystal Lake with his friend Hawes to find closure by digging up Jason's rotting corpse and destroying it. So it goes about as well as you'd expect, with Tommy stabbing Jason's corpse with a metal fence post and a bolt of lightning striking the post and electrifying Jason's body. Jason's eyes open and he rises from the grave, attacking Tommy and killing Hawes. Jason sees his old hockey mask and realizes, "I'm only me when I'm with you." Tommy escapes, drives to the sheriff, and tells him, "I did something bad. I brought Jason back to life." Sheriff Garris thinks it's a hoax, and warns Tommy that people around here don't want to be reminded of Jason Voorhees. Tommy tries to steal a gun and gets locked up. The sheriff's teenage daughter Megan arrives at the station and thinks Tommy is a total babe. Megan and her friends are counselors at the newly reopening summer camp, now named Camp Forest Green. Call it what you want, it's still Camp Crystal Lake, and it still has a death curse. The sheriff decides to let Tommy go, but Tommy leads the sheriff to the cemetery to prove that Jason killed his friend. But because the cemetery caretaker covered Jason's grave back up with Hawes now in it, the police say, "No body, no crime." Bodies start piling up around the area, including that caretaker, who pays for sins when Jason delivers a deadly message in a bottle. A newly engaged couple has to settle for "I almost do" when Jason decides to cancel their wedding. And when new romantics Court and Nikki try to hook up in an RV, their party is crashed by JV. Tommy gets Megan to help him deal with Jason, but when the deputies find Tommy with Megan, the sheriff says, "I knew you were trouble," and Tommy is arrested again. Meanwhile, Jason finally makes his way to the camp, and only the young campers are spared from Jason's rampage. The sheriff and several of his deputies go to the camp to make sure everyone's okay, but when they get there, they find the cabin soaked red with the counselor's blood. Back at the station, Megan goes renegade and helps Tommy escape from his cell, because Tommy apparently made a rebel of a sheriff man's teenage daughter. They rush to the camp where most of the deputies have already been killed. When Sheriff Garris realizes Jason is heading for his daughter, the sheriff decides, "I don't want to live forever," and attacks Jason, eventually bending over backwards to save his daughter's life. Tommy's endgame is to go out in a boat, lure Jason to the spot in Crystal Lake where he first drowned, and chain him to a rock at the bottom of the lake. But Jason doesn't go down without a fight, pulling Tommy underwater so he can't breathe. Megan swims out to save Tommy, turns on the boat's motor, and shreds Jason with the propeller, filling the lake with Jason's bad blood. Sometime later at Crystal Lake, a little girl named Tina witnesses her abusive drunken dad, John Shepard, being mean to her mom. When she takes a boat out to the lake, her dad comes out to stop her. He tries to apologize, but Tina says, "You're not sorry." In anger, she says, "I wish you would die." which triggers telekinetic abilities she didn't know she had, causing the dock to collapse, killing John. 7 years later, Tina is a sad, beautiful, tragic teenager who is still struggling with her father's death. Her therapist, Dr. Cruz, convinces Tina and her mother to return to Crystal Lake as part of Tina's therapy. But Dr. Cruz seems less interested in helping Tina and more interested in testing her telekinetic powers. Cruz aggressively demands Tina move a book of matches with her mind, and Tina stresses out. "This is me trying!" Eventually, the matchbook moves like it's being pulled by an invisible string before bursting into flames. A distraught Tina goes out to the lake. She tries to will her father back to life with her powers. "Dear John, please come back to life." But instead of her dad, she accidentally resurrects Jason, who is still underwater from the last film. Tina then meets a group of young people partying at the cabin next door, including potential love interest Nick. Tina tells Nick, "I'm not like all of the girls you've loved before because I was in the mental hospital for accidentally killing my father with my telekinetic powers." This conversation was overheard by Melissa, who has a reputation for being an evil bitch. Melissa wants Nick for herself and thinks, "We were happy until Tina showed up," so she humiliates Tina in front of everyone. This triggers Tina's powers, and Melissa is almost bejeweled to death before Tina flees from the party. Dr. Cruz is revealed to have treacherous motives as he's been mentally abusing Tina on purpose so he can use her abilities to make himself famous. Tina learns this and decides to peace out, but then she has a vision of her mother getting killed by Jason and ends up crashing the getaway car into a tree. Nick meets up with Tina in the woods, but while he's away, Jason shows up at the party house to make sure none of Nick's friends live to see daylight, except Melissa, who dipped out earlier to find Nick because she thinks this love affair with Nick can still happen even though he's clearly into Tina. Jason attacks Dr. Cruz and Tina's mom while they're out looking for Tina, and Dr. Cruz uses Tina's mom as a human shield against Jason's attack, but karma catches up to the doc when Jason rips him open with a tree trimmer. Tina finds her mom's body and starts weeping like a willow. This trauma unlocks Tina's full telekinetic abilities, and now she has powers as if this was a movie from Marvel. She can use her powers to manipulate tree branches and power lines, throw furniture, and even collapse roofs on top of Jason like castles crumbling. Tina and Nick find Melissa at Tina's house and say, "Don't go outside, Jason's out there," but Melissa ignores their warning and gets axed in the face. Jason enters the house and comes after Tina and Nick, and Tina's like, "Look what you made me do to your precious hockey mask." Tina uses her powers to douse Jason with gasoline and ignite him with the furnace. Tina and Nick barely escape the house before it goes boom. They embrace in the afterglow of the burning home until Jason shows up like, "It's obvious that wanting me dead has really brought you two together." Jason is about to kill Tina, but long live Tina's dad, who returns from the dead just long enough to drag Jason underwater and rescue his daughter. Sometime later, Jason is brought back to life by an electric touch when some damaged underwater cables zap his corpse. Jason sneaks aboard a cruise ship filled with graduating seniors heading to New York to celebrate the best day of their young lives, including Sean, the son of the ship's captain, and Rennie, who makes the fearless decision to go on the cruise despite her intense phobia of water. Jason first finds rockstar wannabe JJ, who realizes Jason is the reason for the teardrops on my guitar. And the blood drops. A student named Tamara tries to blackmail her teacher by making it look like he's engaging in illicit affairs with her, but soon Jason kills Tamara with a mirror shard, then strangles her friend Eva under a mirror ball. Jason starts killing off the rest of the graduating seniors, as well as the ship's crew, and when he throws a student named Wayne into the ship's electrical box, his body burns up hotter than a Carolina Reaper, catching the ship on fire. A few of the survivors manage to get on a lifeboat and float to the Big Apple, but get an unpleasant welcome to New York when they learn that Jason has somehow followed them there. Amateur boxer Julius tries to knock Jason out with a series of punches, but Jason hits different, punching Julius's head right off. Jason chases Rennie and Sean into the subway, and sparks fly when Sean pushes Jason onto the high-voltage subway rail. Sean and Rennie enjoy a moment of happiness in Times Square until Jason shows up. Jason kicks a boombox belonging to a bunch of street kids, who are like, "You're dead meat for wrecking our song," until Jason unmasks and scares them off. Sean and Rennie go to an all-night diner for help, but Jason finds them and chases them into the sewers, where Rennie's all, "How would you like some toxic waste in your face?" Things get even worse for Jason when the sewers flood with Coney Island sewage, which causes Jason's face to melt away and somehow turns him back into a kid. So that'll do it for part 1. In part 2, I'll cover Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy vs. Jason, Jason X, and the 2009 Friday the 13th remake. Make sure you're subscribed if you don't want to miss that video. Here's some other stuff to watch, and until next time, later, Danger Seekers.